Wyoming Territory, late summer of 1879. The wind carried the smell of ash even though the fire had died out years ago. Flint Paxton reined in his mare at the edge of a broken fence line, dust rising around his boots as he dismounted. The place looked like it had once been a homestead, low stone foundation, scattered boards half sunk into the earth, and what was left of a chimney leaning like an old man too tired to keep standing. He was only passing through, heading west from Cheyenne with no real aim but to stay ahead of winter and behind trouble. But something about the woman kneeling in the ruins stopped him cold. Her dress was travel-worn, the hem frayed, boots half buried in dirt. She was sifting through the rubble of what used to be a fireplace, her fingers ghosting over scorched brick like she was searching for something she had not quite accepted was gone. He cleared his throat. "You need help?" She looked up fast, startled, one hand going to the small pistol at her side before she registered him. Her eyes were wary but not afraid, deep brown, steady. She pushed to her feet, brushing soot from her skirt. "I am fine," she said. "Just looking." He nodded once. "This place yours?" "It was," she said, voice flat. "A long time ago." Flint stepped closer, careful not to spook her. "I'm Flint Paxton, just passing through." She hesitated before answering. "Mabel Arden." He waited, but she did not offer more, so he looked around instead. "Storm or fire?" "Fire," she said. "Bandits, maybe. When I was a girl, we were not home when it happened. My parents took me and my brother to town for supplies, came back to nothing." He took off his hat, held it in both hands. "I'm sorry." Mabel's jaw tightened. "My father tried to rebuild but died the next year. Mama followed not long after. My brother joined the army. I went east to live with a cousin. Been 12 years. Flint looked at the blackened beams, the collapsed roofline. "What brought you back now?" She looked out over the prairie, the wind pulling her hair loose from its braid. "I needed to see it, needed to know what was left." He did not ask what she hoped to find. Some things a person had to say on their own. "I can help clear it," he said. "If you want." She looked at him, long and careful. "You do not even know me." "I do not need to," he said. "Sometimes you help because it is the right thing to do." Mabel studied him a beat longer, then nodded once. "All right." They worked side by side through the afternoon. Flint hauled wood and stone while Mabel sorted what might still be useful. She found a bent iron kettle, a rusted horseshoe, a charred book with half the pages still clinging to the spine. As the sun dipped low, Flint gathered dry grass and kindling, built a fire in the old hearth. They shared jerky and coffee while dusk settled around them. "You really think it's worth rebuilding?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Depends what you want it to be," he said. "If it is just a place in the dirt, maybe not. But if it is something that still means something to you, then yes." "I think it is worth it." She looked at the fire. "I do not know if I have enough left in me." He watched her fingers curl around the mug, the way her shoulders stayed tight even at rest. "You made it back, that says something." Her lips twitched, not quite a smile. "You do not talk much." "No need to," he said. "I listen better." She glanced at him then, and something shifted in her face, less guarded. "Where are you headed?" "I do not know yet," he said. "Nowhere in particular." She stirred the fire with a stick. "Maybe you stay a while." "Just until I get the walls up." He met her gaze. "I could do that." They built a small lean-to that night, just enough to keep out the wind. Flint gave her the blanket from his bedroll and slept beside the fire, rifle close. In the morning, she brought water from the creek and he boiled coffee, and they started again. By the third day, they had cleared most of the debris and stacked lumber that could be salvaged. Flint hauled in fresh timber from a grove 2 miles south. Mabel measured and marked the ground with chalk, drawing out the shape of the new house. It was smaller than the old one, but clean and square. Late that afternoon, as they rested in the shade of a cottonwood, She looked at him without speaking for a long time. "My father used to sit here," she said softly. "He would smoke his pipe and watch the wheat come up." Flint looked out across the field, gone wild now with buffalo grass and sage. "I used to dream of coming back," she said, "fixing it all. But I never thought I actually would." "You are doing it," he said. "I would not be if you had not stopped." Flint's voice was steady. "I am glad I did." She reached out then, slow, and touched his hand where it rested on his knee, just a brush of her fingers, uncertain but real. He did not pull away. They stayed like that a while, quiet. That night, as they sat beside the fire again, she said, "You never said what you are running from." "I am not running," he said. "Just finished with where I was." She nodded like she understood. "Me too." The next morning they started laying the foundation. Flint dug while Mabel packed the soil. She laughed when he got dirt in his beard, and he tossed a clump at her boots in protest. It was the first time he had heard her laugh, and he liked the sound of it more than he expected. By the end of the week, the walls were coming up slow but steady. He caught her watching him more often now, and she did not look away when he met her eyes. Some nights they talked. Others they just sat side by side, firelight flickering between them. When a storm rolled through one evening, she pulled her blanket closer and leaned against him without asking. He wrapped an arm around her shoulder, and she sighed like it was the first time she had let herself breathe easy in years. Neither of them said a word about it, but something had started. Something real. And it was growing stronger with every board they nailed, every quiet meal they shared, every evening spent beneath the stars. And neither of them wanted to walk away. The dry days gave way to a stretch of slow, cool mornings, the kind where breath clouded faintly and the earth held its dampness past dawn. Flint pulled his coat tighter as he stepped out from the lean-to and saw Mabel already at the post line, her hair pinned back under a worn blue kerchief, hammer in hand. She didn't look over when he approached, but her voice carried steady. "You sleep all right. I've had worse," he said. "You?" She tapped the head of a nail into place and gave a quick nod. "The wind kept catching the tarp, thought it was a man walking once, got my heart going." He knelt beside her, setting down a fresh bundle of nails. "You carry it still, don't you, that night?" Mabel didn't answer at first. Then she stood and brushed her hands clean on her apron. Every fire leaves something behind, even when it's out. He didn't press her. Instead, they returned to measuring out the last of the west wall. The structure was beginning to take shape, beams raised, corner joints fitted, roof frame angled and waiting. Flint had set a new door frame 2 days earlier, and Mabel had sanded it smooth with a scrap of leather until it shone like something worth keeping. That afternoon, a pair of riders came up the ridge, a stocky man on a bay gelding and a lanky boy trailing behind him. Mabel kept her hammer low but firm in her hand as the riders approached. Flint stepped just ahead of her, steady and quiet. The older man tipped his hat. "Name's Illy Cates. My boy and I been driving cattle east, saw the smoke." "You lost?" Flint asked without warmth. Illy smiled, easy and unbothered. "Just curious. Folks don't usually build out here anymore." "This land's not empty," Mabel said. Illy looked her way, then back to Flint. "You two fixing it for yourselves or someone else?" Mabel answered. "For me." Illy nodded, gave a small grunt. "Well, best of luck then. Just thought we'd say howdy." He reined back and the boy followed without a word, leaving only hoof prints behind. Mabel watched them disappear over the rise. "I didn't like how he looked at the place. He looked like a man who's seen things fall apart and doesn't believe in putting them back," Flint said. "Let him ride on." They worked until the air turned gold and soft, the kind of light that made everything seem gentler than it was. Mabel sat on the porch beam, her knees pulled close while Flint checked the alignment of the rafters. She glanced over after a while. "You ever had a place of your own?" she asked. No. Why not? He leaned on the beam beside her, watching the tree line. I reckon a place doesn't mean much if you've got no one to share it with. She tilted her head. You ever come close? He shook his head once. Not really. She looked out toward the field. I almost married once in Ohio. He was a cooper, kept bees in the spring. He said he liked the way I peeled apples. Flint didn't say anything. He wanted children. A farm, a church life. But I couldn't sit still. I kept thinking of this place. I left one morning, took the train to St. Louis, never saw him again. Flint looked down at his hands. You regret it, sometimes, but not the choice, just the way I left. The evening settled calm and quiet. He handed her the last cup of coffee from the pot, and their fingers brushed. She didn't pull away. He didn't speak. When the moon rose, Mabel stood and walked toward the lean-to. At the door, she paused and looked back. I'm glad you're here, Flint. He nodded once. Me too. She stepped inside, and he stayed out a while longer, listening to the low wind move through the grass, thinking about what it meant to build something with your own hands and what it meant to stay. By the time the roof was half shingled, the air had turned sharp enough in the mornings to keep breath visible past sunrise. Flint rose early, as always, but found Mabel already at the hearth, kneeling beside a pot of beans simmering over the coals. She had wrapped herself in an old wool shawl, the fringe worn smooth from years of folding. He stepped lightly, not wanting to break the quiet. I found a spring yonder, she said without looking up. North slope, past that stand of juniper. Clean water still running. He crouched across from her, nodding once. That'll save us the walk to the creek. She ladled beans into 2 tin bowls, passed one to him. Her hands were red from the cold, but her grip stayed steady. I was thinking, she said between mouthfuls, about putting a root cellar beneath the back room. My mama used to keep jars of peaches and string beans down there. Said it made the house feel more like a home, knowing food was tucked away for winter. Flint stirred his beans, then looked across at her. We could dig it tomorrow. Ground soft enough still. She gave a short nod and finished eating without another word, but something in her face had softened, like naming that memory made it real again. Later that day, they fitted the rafters over the east wall, working in rhythm without needing to speak much. Flint handed her nails as she kept to her ladder, arms stretched overhead, hair falling loose from its pins. At one point she paused, her gaze drifting eastward. He followed her eyes. You expecting someone? No, she said, but I keep thinking about whether my brother's still out there. He'd be 32 now. Haven't heard a word since the war ended. Flint brushed sawdust from his sleeves. You want to try and find him? She climbed down from the ladder. I wouldn't even know where to start. He was sent west, then the letters stopped. I used to pray he'd show up in town one day. I checked the post every week. He nodded slowly. Sometimes the quiet's worse than the news. She looked at him then, something unreadable behind her eyes. You lose someone, he hesitated. A younger sister, fever back in Texas. I was away working cattle, missed the burial by 2 days. She didn't reach for him or offer comfort. She just stood there with him, the wind carrying the smell of pine sap and sawdust between them. That evening, Mabel brought out a bundle wrapped in canvas she hadn't touched before. Inside were old iron hinges, a small box of square nails, and a rusted door latch. These were from the original house, she said. I pulled them out after the fire. Flint turned one hinge in his hand, still strong. I thought I'd use them when I came back. Didn't expect they'd still be good. He looked up at her. You held on to these all that time, she nodded. They were all I had some days. They installed the front door together, setting the hinges flush and straight. When the latch clicked into place, she pressed her palm to the wood, eyes closed for a breath. Feels like it's real now, she whispered. Flint stood beside her, one hand on the frame. "It is." She didn't move away. Instead, she turned toward him, her voice low. "You've done more for me than anyone has in years. I don't know how to thank you properly." "You don't owe me thanks," he said, "but if you're offering something honest, I'll take that." She looked up at him, the lines of her face softened by firelight and the hush between words. "Then I'll be honest with you, Flint Paxton. I didn't think I'd feel safe again, not here, not after what happened. But when you're near, it's like the ground holds steadier." He touched her hand where it rested on the door frame, rough fingers brushing hers just once. "I mean to stay, Mabel. If you'll have me." She didn't speak, only stepped forward and placed her hand over his heart, steady and sure. The quiet between them said more than words ever could. Outside, the wind shifted and the scent of fresh cut wood rose up like a promise. The frost came slow, threading silver through the grass before dawn and curling the edges of the last sun-dried leaves. Flint stood by the fence line, mending a gap where a mule deer had pushed through in the night. He worked with steady purpose, but his gaze kept drifting back to the cabin, where Mabel was fitting shelves into the pantry. She had taken to humming when she worked, not songs he recognized, but quiet things, like she wasn't singing for anyone but herself. She moved with more ease now, shoulders looser, her steps no longer guarded. He noticed the difference but didn't name it. He figured she would if she ever wanted to. When the sun edged higher, he came back to the house with a coil of rope slung over one shoulder. Mabel met him at the door, wiping her hands on her skirt. "I thought about starting a garden come spring," she said. "Not for show. Beans, squash, potatoes, maybe some onions if the soil holds." "You'll want to test it first," Flint said. "Might need ash or lime mixed in." "I worked a little field like that once. Shallow roots didn't take until we turned the dirt 3-4 times." She stepped aside so he could enter. "You ever live long on any of those places you worked? Long enough to be useful. Not long enough to be missed." He set the rope down by the hearth and looked around. The new walls held warmth now, the chinking sealed, the cracks stuffed with moss and straw. A kettle hung steady over the fire, and the light landed soft on the floorboards they'd laid with their own hands. Mabel leaned against the doorframe. "I used to think I'd raise children in this house, sit them down right there and teach them to shell peas or stitch a hem." Flint crouched to stir the coals, then added a log. "Still could." She didn't answer right away. "Then, you think a woman like me could start again at 31? He straightened, brushing soot from his fingers. "I think a woman like you can do whatever she sets her mind to." She watched him for a long moment. "You always say just enough, don't you? I don't see the use in wasting words." She smiled, not with her lips, but with that subtle light in her eyes. "Come with me," she said. They walked out past the ridge where the fields once stretched, now overgrown but still marked by the gentle rise and fall of old furrows. She knelt down and dug her fingers into the soil, turned over a handful, then let it fall back. Still dark. "Damp," she murmured. Flint crouched beside her, pressing his palm to the earth. "It'll take. You've got good ground here." She looked up at him, her voice low. "I'm scared of wanting too much." He didn't look away. "Wanting isn't wrong. It's what makes us build." She studied him for a beat, then rose slowly. "I've got a letter I never sent. To my brother. It's in my trunk. I wrote it before I left Ohio, couldn't bring myself to post it." Flint stood too. "You thinking of sending it now? I don't know. Maybe it's not for him anymore. Maybe it was just something I needed to say out loud." They walked back in silence, each carrying something unspoken. Inside, Mabel went to the trunk at the foot of her cot and pulled out a folded envelope, the edges worn soft. She held it a moment, then handed it to Flint. "I want you to read it." He hesitated, then took it, opened it gently. "I told him I was coming back here, that I couldn't stay gone any longer. I said I wanted to make something real with what was left. I told him if he ever found his way this far west, he'd know where to find me. Flint looked up from the page. You meant every word, she nodded. I just didn't know if anyone would ever read them. You've got someone now, he said, folding the letter again. You're not alone here. She reached for it, but instead of taking it back, she rested her hand against his. I know that now. The fire crackled behind them. Outside, the wind had stilled. Mabel stepped closer, close enough he could see the small scar above her right brow, the one she never spoke of. I don't want you to leave, she said. I don't intend to. She reached up, her fingers brushing the line of his jaw, and for the first time there was no hesitation in her touch. I want a life here, she whispered, with someone who knows how to stay. He leaned forward, slow as the tide rising, and pressed his forehead to hers. Then we'll build it, he said, together. And when she kissed him, it wasn't rushed or desperate. It was steady, like the setting of a cornerstone, like the shape of something lasting finally taking hold. The first snow came in early November light, dry flakes drifting sideways in the wind, clinging to fence posts and the edges of the roof, before melting under the midday sun. Flint watched it fall from the barn's open door, one hand resting on the rail he'd just finished fitting. The barn was smaller than most, just 2 stalls and a hayloft, but it held what they needed: room for Mabel's mule, the tools they'd gathered, and the future they were still shaping. Inside the house, he could hear Mabel softly humming a tune she'd picked up from a passing peddler, who traded her a pair of shears for a sack of dried apples. She had taken to sewing in the evenings, mending old linens into curtains and stitching wool scraps into a quilt that grew little by little across the back of the chair. When he stepped through the door, she looked up from her work, her eyes catching the light from the fire. There's a doe nesting by the creek, he said, brushing snow from his shoulders. Might drop twins before the month's out. She set her needle aside. You always notice those little things. Most folks wouldn't. He unlaced his boots and joined her, sitting beside the hearth where the warmth reached deepest. Spent most of my life with too much noise around. You learn to listen different when you finally get quiet. She picked up the quilt again, running her thumb across a patch of faded calico. Do you ever miss it? Moving place to place, no ties? He shook his head. Not anymore. This life's slower, but it holds. She tilted her head toward him. I've been thinking about the land beyond the ridge. The soil's good there, and there's enough light for wheat. He raised a brow. You planning to plant a field on your own? I was hoping I wouldn't have to. Her voice was steady, but her hand stilled on the fabric. He reached over, covering her hand with his. You won't. They sat like that for a while, the fire popping gently, the snow ticking softly against the window glass. As the light outside faded into dusk, Flint rose and fetched the small box he'd hidden beneath the floorboards, an old tobacco tin, dented at the corner, wrapped in a strip of flannel. He sat back down beside her and held it out. What's this? She asked. Something I've been carrying a long while. Waiting for the right place to leave it. She opened the tin, finding a thin gold ring inside. The band was worn, the engraving on the inside nearly rubbed smooth, but it caught the firelight just the same. It belonged to my mother, he said. She gave it to me before she passed. Told me to give it to someone when I found a life worth staying for. Mabel stared down at it, quiet. Then she looked at him, eyes full of something that didn't have to be named. I never thought I'd have this again, she whispered. Not the house, not the land. But most of all, not someone who'd want to build it with me. He took her hand and slid the ring gently onto her finger. Then let's make it ours, all of it. She laughed, a soft, breathless sound, and leaned into him, her forehead pressing against his. You're sure? I've never been more certain of anything. They spent the rest of the evening near the fire, the quilt forgotten on the floor, the snow still falling beyond the windows. When they finally rose, it was to light the lantern and pull the curtains closed against the night. By the time winter set in for good, the root cellar was full, the barn stocked with hay, and the house warm with more than just the stove's heat. They worked side by side through the cold months, tending to what needed doing, living in the rhythm of the land and each other. In March, the soil turned soft again, and Mabel planted the first seeds with her hands deep in the earth. Flint built her a trellis for beans and rigged a rain barrel under the eaves. They hadn't made any announcements, hadn't written to distant cousins or posted bands at the church in town. But folks started calling the place Paxton's Ridge all the same, and no one questioned it. That summer, the wheat sprouted in neat rows, the garden bloomed heavy, and the evenings stretched long and golden. Mabel took to sitting on the porch with her feet up, a book in her lap and Flint's hand resting over hers. He'd built her a rocking bench from leftover pine, and she said it was the first thing that ever made her feel still in all the right ways. One night in late August, with the stars bright above and the fields waving in the breeze, she turned to him and said, "You know, I think this is what my father wanted for this place, not just to rebuild it but to see it full of life again." Flint looked out over the land, then back at her. "He'd be proud of what you've done." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "No, he'd be proud of what we've done." They stayed like that until the fireflies came, blinking across the ridge in slow, drowsy patterns. The barn door creaked once, then settled. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of ripe wheat and warm pine, and they knew without speaking that this was the life they'd made, not borrowed, not chased, but built from the ground up. Together. Forever.